Good morning. I'm John Holmes with the Advent Archives Committee, and we're standing here next to John DeWitt McCullough's grave. As you know, John DeWitt McCullough served the Church of the Advent for 24 years on two different occasions, before the Civil War and after the Civil War. He was born in Society Hill, South Carolina, and was mentored by the rector at Trinity Church in Society Hill, which is the oldest existing church building in the Upper Diocese of South Carolina, having been built in 1833. When he was a child, he gave $5 of his own money toward the building of the church, and he gave his personal prayer book to be included in the cornerstone. He, of course, was ordained at Calvary Church down in Glen Springs, and then became a rector here, and is responsible for the building and the design of the Church of the Advent, along with 22 other churches in the state of South Carolina and one in North Carolina. Christ Church in Greenville would be an example of one, and the Church of the Resurrection in Greenwood would be another. Another interesting fact about the Church of the Resurrection is the fact that they have a baptismal font that originally was owned by the Advent, and it was produced by famous sculptor Hiram Walker. It now resides in the Church of the Resurrection in Greenwood. This is the original altar of the Church of the Advent. It's been outside as long as I've been a member, which has been 1973. It was used originally, and it'll be pointed out to you a little later in this film, that inside the original church. Today, it's mostly used for the blessing of the animals, but I think that a lot of people don't know that this was the altar, original altar in the church.
Good morning. I'm Adair, and following up on what John Holmes was talking about, John D. McCullough, I wanted to point out that inside the church, as many of you have seen, this is what we call the bishop's chair. And as far as we know, it was made by John D. McCullough, and there is a plaque on the side that attributes it to him with a date of 1874. So as you can see, it's nearly 150 years old. We do have a photograph of the interior of the church before it was expanded to the current size, and it shows this chair in use in the sanctuary area at that time. But it's a beautiful chair. The bishop of the Diocese of Upper South Carolina has always sat in it on visits as long as I can remember. And of course, with the mitre on top, it implies that this is a chair for the bishop. It's a beautiful chair, and very proud of it, and it's a wonderful artifact of ours. One of the things that many of you will remember, and some of you may not be aware of, is that until about the mid-1980s, this altar front was actually up against the reredos on the east wall of the church. And when Clay Turner came as rector, one of the things that I think it was his suggestion that we move it out so that the priest could actually address the congregation when going through specifically the Eucharist service. But this is the original reredos. We have a great picture of the interior of the church circa 1925, and it shows the reredos on the rear wall under the same beautiful windows with the altar front, as I said, up against the reredos. One of the changes that was made in the mid-80s when the interior was remodeled was the removal of the organ and choir from this area of the church to the rear of the church where the organ is currently located. But again, going back to the 1925 photo of the interior and before, the organ used to sit right here, and the organist could view over the organ and see the choir, who was seated in pews that faced each other right through here. So when you came up for communion, you would walk between choir pews to the altar rail, and then for congestion purposes, the people would exit through the sacristy or exit the altar rail and come back down here. But when that remodeling was done, it was determined and recommended by the Flintrop Company that the organ be placed in the rear of the church as it is now. I would like to point out some of the elements that are in use now that have been in use for well over 100 years, because we show them in the 1925 picture. One is this beautiful pulpit. I don't know when it is dated, however, it has been here prior to 1925. Another is the lectern. Same lectern has been in use for all those years. Another element is the altar rail with the part that folds over. Same one that has been here since the church was remodeled in 1897. The credence table, same one. So all of these elements, at the same time, so many things have been changed through the years. Many of these elements are still the same, including, I'll point out, all of the pews that were in use, I suppose, originally when the church was remodeled or expanded in 1897. I've got a picture, or in the picture, in the 1925 picture, you'll notice in the middle of the carpet a very large air return in the middle of the aisle. That was there when I was a child, and I remember walking around it as we entered and left the church. Another interesting thing on the walls of the church that has been covered up is there was about a 2-foot strip of what appears to be wallpaper. It's a repeating pattern, and like I say, somewhere along the line it was covered up, but that was one of the original elements inside the church that has been changed. This alcove was shown in the 1925 photograph, but interestingly, it had a row of organ pipes in it. I don't know whether those were live organ pipes or if they were there just for decoration, but I do know that by the time I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, the organ pipes were gone and this was a blank wall. The alcove was uncovered and put back into use during that restoration or remodeling in the mid-1980s. And that's when the statue for baptisms was moved over here to this alcove, and it was put back in use. One thing I found that was very curious in the 1925 photo was the interior lighting of the church. None of our chandeliers were installed at that time. Instead, the church was lit for all purposes, especially services, by sconces with light bulbs lining the wall going down the church on both sides. I'm sure it was in the transepts, and then above the pulpit and the lectern. So the church appears to me to have been very dim at that time, or dimly lit at that time. Big improvement today with the lighting that we use today. I did want to point out that we have a picture of the church circa 1895, and it shows that the entire length of the church extended to what's now the end of this transept. The transept was not there. It was not added until 1897, so the entire length of the church, including the sanctuary, was from what's still the front door and all the way to here, but that was it. And it was basically one rectangular building with a smaller chancel and sanctuary on the east end here. One of the things that was interesting, and Janelle, I don't know if you can get it in here, is that the main entrance to the church at that time was the side entrance that we used from the cloister. The front entrance had not been made into a front entrance at that time. And from early pictures, it appears that the church had a shingle roof, wood shingle roof, rather than a slate roof as it does today. A couple other comments about the church exterior. The original church building was built under the supervision of Dr. McCullough and was completed during the Civil War about 1863, and was probably constructed using enslaved labor at the time. So you got the original church until 1897, when the transepts were added and the church was extended all the way to its current size. Then about 1913, Pendleton Hall was added as a parish hall. It wasn't known as Pendleton Hall at first. It was known as the parish hall, but it was later named in honor of the long-serving Dr. Pendleton, who was the rector here, until 1940, I believe, 1939 or 1940. The bell tower was added in 1916. It was named in honor of Georgia Alden Cleveland, wife of John B. Cleveland. It's one of the early members of this church.